everyone, so my name's Lauren-Jane. I'm currently working as an F1 and I've wanted to make a video for a while about what it's like to go through med school with a child. I get asked all the time about how I managed and how I coped and how I juggled, and I know that there's a lot of parents out there who might be wanting to go to med school or have applied to med school and wonder what it might be like, and who are anxious about that. And I just really wanted to make a video just talk about my experiences and how I'd found it. I think parents at medical school is a really great idea. I think we offer a new perspective to our colleagues who aren't parents, and I think we make really good doctors as well, because for instance, they say when you treat a child you need to treat the parent as well, because the parents are always so anxious, and I know that can instill sometimes feelings of frustration in practitioners. As a parent, you understand that when your child's ill, that will make you very anxious as well. So I think it's more easy for us to understand why, for instance, parents get so agitated about their children being ill. And that, that's one example. There are many reasons. I think that parents make really, really good junior doctors and good med students. I think the first thing that most people must be thinking when they're thinking about going to med school when you're a bit older is, can I afford to? Now, my son was 17 months old when I went to med school, and I was in a relationship. That relationship did break down after about a year. So I've been both a single parent and in a relationship. There is financial support that's available to you. If that's putting you off, definitely go and have a conversation with your local authority and with NHS boss, because there is support there for you. It's obviously been a few years since I accessed that support, but please go out and have those conversations. Don't be put off doing medicine because of that. The fees are massive, it's 9,000 a year, but the NHS pays the first 3,000. So in terms of real debt, you're taking about 6,000 a year, which I know that's still a lot, especially if you need other kinds of support, but I think it's worth it. I love being a doctor. In terms of workload, so a usual course is split into a preclinical and clinical. Now, I did a graduate entry course, so that's 4 years, not 5, and they're really losing that year off your preclinical phase. So whereas the undergraduates do their preclinical in 2.5 years, you're going to do it in 18 months, and you are going to have to make up that work. So it means that course is really full on. I'm from an arts degree, so everything was new to me. So I did find that quite hard. The majority of people in my cohort are from biomedical science degrees. A smaller proportion had chemistry and physics degrees, and then there was a very small proportion of us that did arts degrees. So I found that, I was really coming from no background of scientific knowledge at all, which was difficult. I think in terms of thinking about workload, it's good for us to start off by thinking about what the structure of the preclinical course looks like. So it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. You have to attend, it's not optional. At Nottingham, where I did graduate entry medicine, we would do lectures all day on a Monday, and they would have a theme. So it was like lung cancer or something that week. You would do lectures on lung anatomy, lung physiology, lung pathology, pharmacology, and then all day over that Monday. And then I would leave about 5:30. I would go and pick my son up. I would spend some time with him, give him his dinner, read his bath, his story, and then he would go to bed about 7, 7:30, and then I would work in the evening just writing up those lectures, because the next day, because all of the rest of the week will hinge off those lectures, so it's kind of important that you've got a handle on them. It makes it easier. We would have PBL 3 times a week at Nottingham, so that stands for problem-based learning, and that's where you have a base room, which is really nice because it's just yours, you and 8 other students, your PBL group, and you will have a case, which will be a patient who's come in to see you, and you'll kind of work through the history. And in this week it would be, say, lung cancer, and you would all do a presentation at one point during those PBL sessions, so that requires preparation. And then you would also have clinical skills twice a week, which doesn't require loads of preparation. You just have to read through a workbook. And then anatomy lab as well, which does require a couple of hours worth of preparation in terms of workbook. So the week's quite full on, but luckily it's really, at Nottingham anyway, it's really cohesive. So I would find that throughout the week my workload would kind of go off a bit. I did used to work about 60 hours a week in the beginning, mostly because I'm a book learner, so I have to kind of read it myself, and it was all brand new to me. You might find that you can do it quicker than that. I found that very manageable because I enjoyed the topic. I felt really, really grateful to be there, and I was enjoying it. I didn't work at all at weekends, so I always felt like that time at weekends was for my child, and I would take the weekends off. Sometimes I would work in the evenings when he'd gone to bed, but I felt in those preclinical years that I was working really hard, but that there was a balance and it was doable. I think as a parent we often feel very guilty. I remember, or even now, I feel very guilty often about being at work. In an ideal world I would work 2 days a week and spend the rest with my child, but that's just not the reality, and so I think as parents we can often feel guilty for being at work, and then also kind of feel guilty that you're not working as hard as everyone else because they don't have children. So I think one of the issues with being a parent at med school is just reconciling those two things and being really kind to yourself and making sure you have time for your child, having time for your studies, being present in that moment when you're doing each of them. And like I said, just being a really good friend to yourself and not being too hard on what you can and cannot achieve, because you can't do everything. And that was something that I found really difficult in med school, was trying to do well at both of those things. It did get easier. So like I said, I used to work about 60 hours on the preclinical course for the first 18 months. But when I transferred onto the clinical course, I worked a lot less. I'd say more like 40, because you've already learned everything, you've already done everything, you're kind of building on what you already know. It's much more like feet on the ground, on the wards stuff, and then in the evening it's consolidating what you already know. So what are the clinical pathways, all of that kind of stuff. So I do feel that if you can get through the preclinical years, you'll find the clinical years much easier, or I did anyway. It is really hard work. There's no getting around it. It is hard work, but it's completely doable. And if you're a person who's sitting there thinking, I would love to go to med school, but I've got children, how do I go about this? If you want to do it, you can make it happen. And I really enjoyed med school, and I thought it was nice for my child to see me achieving something. I had a degree obviously anyway, but I wasn't really achieving very much before med school, and I kind of wanted him to see me learn and grow and strive for something and achieve something. And I think that that's been really useful for him to see that hard work and the payoff of that. I also said, I think parents make really good med students and really good doctors, and I think that's true. We have a different perspective that other medical students don't have, and especially when we do group learning, it's really great to include your voice in that, because you do have a different experience of life, and I think medical schools are really aware of that and really benefit from that. And I think you have a maturity that you can bring towards being a doctor as well, which is really useful. So I would say if you're a parent that's considering going to med school, go ahead and do it if that's what you want, because we value you and you'll be really useful. In terms of kind of cost day to day, I don't think medical school is that expensive. You do need to buy a stethoscope. That costs about £50, and occasionally some books, but it's not going to cost you lots of money day to day other than your fees. In terms of exams, again, increased periods of study before exams, which can be really difficult, because obviously we have a thing where all of a sudden your child gets ill and then you've got a big exam and you've not slept, and that can be really difficult to deal with. And there is kind of no easy way to deal with that. I always felt as a med student that I had to work harder than everyone else, because sooner or later, inevitably, you're going to drop the ball because, you know, you've got work to do, and then your child won't settle or is poorly, and you miss an evening study, or you miss a couple of days at work, or, you know, at university where other people hadn't. So the way I managed this was I always tried to stay ahead. So if at any point I had to step off, I didn't feel super guilty about it because I knew that I'd done the work beforehand. So there are obstacles, I think, which other people don't have, but they are manageable with organisation and, you know, I think just be kind to yourself. You can't do everything, and that would be my one key kind of point from this topic, is just do it and be kind to yourself, because I did it, but all that I found I often felt very conflicted about. I kind of felt sometimes felt like people didn't take me so seriously at med school because I had a child, that I was kind of here as a hobby, like a hobby course or a hobby job. No one goes to med school because it's a hobby job, it's just not done. But perhaps that's one of my insecurities, but I did feel that other med students maybe were taken a bit more seriously, and that maybe I would be kind of buttonholed into one of the softer specialities in medicine, because I've got a child, and that's not the case at all. And one of the other things that I found really difficult is medicine's really competitive. I don't just mean getting in, I mean day to day they're constantly pitting you against each other. It's very competitive. Like the way they rank us against each other, I think is just not helpful, and it's quite outdated. But as a med student with a child, you have something else that's not been taken into account in those rankings, and it can be quite soul destroying to come lower down, especially when you're working so hard and you're taking very little time for yourself. The other point that I wanted to touch on was just to take time for yourself. You can't work all the time. You can't just do work and parenting. You've got to take time to do whatever you need to do. Exercise, reading, social time. That's really, really important, I think, to survive, because med school is really hard and parenting is really hard. And they both require so much of yourself. If you're going to do it, just make sure every now and again you just say, right, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to sit here and watch this box set. I'm going to go out with my friends and I'm not going to think about, you know, these things, because we need to look after ourselves and we need to support each other. I think that's all I want to say, really. I'm really interested to hear your comments, or if there's anything else that I've missed that you'd like to know. If you want to do it, and you know you're sitting at home and you're thinking, do you know, I really wanted to be a doctor, but life hasn't really gone this way for me. Now I've got a mortgage to pay, or you know, I'm a single parent, or I'm, you know, am I too old? You know, really just go and do it, make it happen. You know, you really get to control your own life and your path, and don't let anyone tell you you cannot do it. You can do it. Med school is hard, but it's not impossible. It's good fun. I enjoyed it. I have loved being a med student, and I love being a doctor. I have enjoyed my F1 year. I think it's completely worth it. I'd say being an F1 is harder with a child than being at med school was, but that's the content for another video. I hope this is useful. If you've got any questions or comments, please give them to me. Have a lovely day.